And we're joined by political commentators Piers, Pottinger and Nigel Nelson in the studio.
Well, shall we start with whether or not there could be a split in Reform UK? Because the party's newly appointed Justice Advisor, who's called Vanessa Frake, said yesterday that some transgender criminals should be imprisoned in women's jails. Nigel Farage appeared to support this.
Well, when it comes to trans women in prisons, isn't it interesting that we run our country with people who become ministers, who generally have absolutely no idea of the subject matter that they're talking about? I've personally never worked in a prison, so I can't answer it, but I think you'll find that the answer that you'll get from somebody who has worked in prisons at the highest possible level is, I think, basically it's about risk assessment, isn't it?
I've never worked in prison, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, quite an extreme.
Wow.
He was very
Someone who wants to be Prime Minister.
He was very uncomfortable, wasn't he? Because we spoke a little earlier to... actually, it's in the article.
Colin Sutton.
So, reading on, earlier we spoke to former Met Police detective and now Reform UK's Police and Crime Advisor, Colin Sutton, who flatly opposed the plan put forward by Vanessa Frake.
Is that biological men belong in men's prisons. But the whole thing...
So you disagree with her?
I do disagree with her on that, but as I say, that's healthy. That's the sort of thing that we need to have debates about when we formulate the policy. But the whole thing here is not about, I don't know, some kind of recrimination or punishment for people who happen to be trans. It's about risk, and it's about risk to women. And that should be at the forefront of whatever policy we come up with, to make sure that the risk to women inside prisons or inside any women's space is minimised.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cybercriminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
That's the voice of common sense, isn't it, Piers, Colin Sutton? You know, if you're a trans man, if men go in men's prisons, women go in women's prisons.
Absolutely,
and just
yes.
because you're identifying as doesn't change anything.
No. I mean, if you identify as a llama, would you get put in a zoo?
Well,
I mean,
maybe you would.
Probably, yes.
The whole thing is, and I'm afraid this is indicative of a problem Reform has got, which is that when it comes to policy, it all looks a bit flaky around the edges.
They've got 4 years to get it right, I suppose.
They have, but they need to not keep making, I think, blunders on policy announcements before they've thought them through properly. Because the thing that Reform sells itself on is straight talking, direct, sensible stuff. Now, as soon as they go away from that, they start losing people's support. And although they're way ahead at the moment, it's still a long way to the next election.
But there's no point hiring experts if you don't listen to them. And I think Vanessa Frake's great. I mean, absolutely, that she's been on the front line. She knows what it's like to be a prison governor. She's been in Holloway, she's been in Wandsworth. And
Myra Hindley made her a cup of tea.
Myra Hindley made her a cup of tea and looked after Rose West.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is that I was interested about her line on trans prisoners. I actually think that a biological man should be in a man's prison, the same way I think that that women-only spaces should be preserved. However, she made a really good case about if you do the right risk assessment for somebody who has been a trans woman for 30-odd years, it would actually be inhumane to put them into a male prison. She made a really good case.
Did she not notice a Supreme Court ruling?
Nigel.
No, the Supreme Court ruling is different. What the Supreme Court ruling said was there's only one biological sex.
Right.
Two, hopefully, otherwise species is finished.
We weren't talking about gender.
Right.
So on that basis, then, it means that the Supreme Court guaranteed women's-only spaces and no one could then make an objection to
the Supreme
them.
Court ruling means that if you segregate something by sex, then that is by biological sex.
Exactly. That's
and prisons are segregated by sex.
Yes, that's
and
right.
therefore there is no justification whatsoever for anybody who is biologically male being in a women's prison. But just to come back to, Nigel Farage's comment, and one of the reasons that I left Andrew High and Driver the autocue there was because I hadn't heard his comment before saying that, well, I've never been in a prison. How would I know?
Have a view.
And that's completely inexcusable. Like, nobody expects a Prime Minister or a future Prime Minister to have worked in a school, a hospital, a prison, been a bin man. Like, that's not how government works. But the idea that he hasn't thought about this, given the dialogue that's been going on over the last few years,
Well,
if you asked him, what are the finer points of Chinese export policy? Now, you might expect him to say, well, I don't actually know enough about it. But on this issue, to not have an opinion,
well, I think particularly as you're announcing this woman's appointment. But I would say just because she's worked in a prison doesn't mean she's any good at it. And the state of our British prisons are appalling.
Yeah.
It's an appalling system. It really is at breaking point.
But she's an expert. And she's worth listening to. I mean, she also
But I mean, if she's hobnobbing with Myra Hindley and Rose West, I'd also question her choice of friends.
Yeah, I'm not sure she was hobnobbing exactly.
Well, you said she had a cup of tea.
But she also likes the idea of shorter sentences. Her argument, getting rid of shorter sentences, much as David Gauke does. The argument being that if you stick somebody in prison for 6 months, 9 months, they lose their family, they lose their home, they lose their support network.
That's called being a criminal.
And as a result, they become a worse criminal because that's all they've got left.
As you know,
so
Nigel,
it makes sense what she's saying.
I am a great believer in prison reform. We need prison reform because all we do is lock up people in the same way we did in Dickensian times. And it's absurd and it doesn't help. And we don't really make any serious attempts at rehabilitation. And I actually believe we need a fundamental reform of prisons. The trouble is, again, we don't have any money. It comes very low down the priority list. No politician gets votes for sorting out.
There are no votes in it.
There are no votes in it for politicians, and therefore they don't pay any attention to it. And actually, our prison system is barbaric. Like the American system, too, is barbaric. I mean, the Shawshank Redemption is still as relevant today as it was when it was made. And the Americans have just as bad a prison system as they do in Turkey, which Midnight Express was supposed to show the horrors of. No, our prison system is dire. But I do firmly believe that women go to women's prison and men go to men's prison, full stop.
Yes.
Well,